Hello again. My name is Reverend Gregory Holston, and this is Just Nation, a program dedicated to talk about the issues of race, faith, and justice in the city of Philadelphia and beyond. I'm here again with my co-host, Nia Holston, attorney from the Abolitionist Law Center. And this program today is about the election results that just happened. As of the taping of this show, it is clear that Donald Trump is going to be the next president of the United States, and that the Senate is going to be Republican, as well as maybe the House. And also that many Republican candidates in the state of Pennsylvania have won. And quite frankly, these results, based on all of what Donald Trump has said that he wants to do, from saying he was going to be a dictator from day one to firing federal employees, to punishing his people who were against him, using the Department of Justice to do it, and all the things that are in Project 2025 are quite alarming about the results of this election and the consequences of this election as we go forward. So our conversation today is beginning to grapple with that. We don't have all the answers, but we're going to begin to have these conversations and continue to have them going forward, so as long as we continue to move forward and find some way to continue to have a democracy in this nation and to ensure that justice is done for all. So, Nia, I know you were I don't know what word is shocked by the results, but it is quite devastating what's happened.
Thank you for that, and welcome everyone. I'm so glad that you're tuned in. And I wouldn't necessarily categorize it as shock. I mean, we've seen this before. In some respects, the writing has been on the wall for quite some time, that at least 50% of the country is willing to vote in someone with such abhorrent views, someone who has plans to destroy. That has been apparent for quite some time. I think for me, what this election says more than anything is that there's a real need for a moral revolution in this country. That this is the expected result of a country based completely on individualism and what's best for me, and forget about the rest of these. That this is a country that is on a path, that has been on a path for quite some time, an incredibly unequal society, and that this is the logical conclusion, the logical manifestation of that sense of greed, of that sense of willing to put aside the human rights of others for in service of what you think is yourself, and in service of white supremacy. And so I know we're going to get into a lot of this discussion today. I'm excited to get into a lot of it. I'm also saddened to get into all of it, because I think even with that recognition that this is not an aberration in terms of who this country is and what this country's identity is. Rather, it is a manifestation of that ideology, and that moving forward, even though I know that, even though I wasn't shocked by this result, it doesn't take away the sadness of knowing people that I love and care for, people that I'm in community with, people that include myself, are going to be even more harmed than they were already harmed under the system.
Maybe the word shock was the inappropriate word here. As a person of faith, to see so many people of faith seem to reject parts of their faith to be able to elect and support Donald Trump. I think that part is, again, not shocking, disheartening, sad in many ways. I grew up with the principle that we're supposed to love our neighbors, and to see immigration used in a way to hate our neighbors, and particularly those who are people of color. That we're supposed to welcome the stranger. That's what my faith teaches me. And to see that so many people don't want to welcome the stranger. Even though the stranger, the immigrant, has added so much to our nation, all of the studies show that immigration is a powerful force in creating wealth for everybody. We still look at it as some kind of evil that these so-called immigrants are doing. And to support somebody who wants to take all of them, all of these who are undocumented, and to throw them out the nation, to round them up in the millions and spend billions, maybe even trillions of dollars to do it, simply because, not because of financial reasons, because they're such a benefit to the country, but simply for racial reasons, not wanting them to be here. That piece, I can't tolerate it. I'm going to do everything I know in my power to fight it. And it's disheartening to see so many Americans who simply want to have that. And so as we are part of this conversation, to make sure we bring everybody else in, to be able to feel how everybody is feeling about this, and what do we need to do to support the principles we believe in. So we're excited about our guest here today, and I'm going to turn to my left and my good friend Rosalind for her to introduce herself and share a little bit of her thoughts about the election that just has happened.
Well, thank you for having me, both Nia and Reverend Holston. My name is Rosalind Wojcicki. I'm an organizer for union organizer for over 2 decades, and I'm the president of Unite Here Local 274, which is the hotel and food service workers union here in Philadelphia and the surrounding area.
How are you feeling? How am I feeling?
I feel very resolved, about what needs to happen. I think. I think in 2016, when Trump won, I think I did feel more maybe shock and grief. And I think that while I have grief, I think that I had a lot of questions back then about the right course, and I feel much more resolved about what the course needs to be this time around. I think. I do think, actually, for me as a union organizer, the experience of organizing the union in workplaces, whether it's 10 people, 100 people, whatever, we have to bring people together across all kinds of difference on a regular basis and build tremendous unity when people are very afraid, right? And they need something real. They don't have it. We try to get them to tap into their anger and direct that at the people that are responsible. That's our work as union organizers. And so honestly, both in 2016 and now, when I see people choosing to blame others for their problems and not take the harder path of figuring out how do we actually blame the people actually responsible and figure out how to build power together, against the people responsible. How do we take that, the easy blame of, oh, this person's a little different than me. I can be a little bit, maybe, I can, because of my race or because of my gender or my sexual orientation or whatever it is, I can feel a little superior to this person in some way, and I'm going to blame this person and they're going to be the problem, as opposed to really blaming who's really responsible. That's what we struggle with I've been struggling with that every single day for 23 years as a union organizer, and it's very powerful to see. I have seen people over and over again work through that, right? And I've seen people from very different backgrounds come together. That's why I got into the labor movement in the first place, and it's the power of the labor movement, with all of our faults in labor. That is the power of the labor movement. I feel like there's real insight, and I feel that organizing is really the right path forward here, but we just need to be doing it on a much, much larger scale than we currently are.
I was glad to be with some of your folk last week, and was reminded of the fact that one of the few places of diversity actually was a union. Yeah. We're not diverse in our churches. We're not diverse in our neighborhoods. We're not diverse in our schools. For the most part, we're still dealing with the legacy of segregation in all of those areas. But a union, to look out in that audience and to see black and brown and white folk all standing together was a powerful statement about what America can be. Yeah. And maybe even as we talk more about going forward about solutions, The idea of more unionization may be a part of that. And now, we know all the unionizations had its history of racism as well, but the emergent union that's happening now is different.
Well,
so, but go ahead.
Well, I want to bring in our final two panelists. We have Connie Warren, who's here in the studio with us. Connie, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Connie Warren. I'm actually a colleague of Nia's at the Abolitionist Law Center. I'm a veteran communication strategist. I'm also a co-founder and advisor of the Up In movement, a movement to abolish the family policing system.
Thank you for that. And how are you feeling about, some initial thoughts about the post-election conversation?
Wow, it's really complicated for me. There are different layers. I would say that I expected the result, but I think in the last week or so, I was buoyed by a little bit of hope to think that maybe we could pull this off. But I think that it was in the cards that that this was not going to work. I feel like the Democrats failed a lot of people. As a Black woman, I feel like it put us in a very precarious situation, kind of giving the Hail Mary to Kamala Harris with little support, little time to do the job. And it made Black women, frankly, vulnerable to a lot of attacks that we took personally. It felt like what we experienced in the workplace, that having to be perfect, right? While someone with much less qualified, in Donald Trump's case, not qualified at all, you're competing against someone that you should never even compete against. And then the final thing I'll say about that, for me personally, when Kamala was the nominee, as an abolitionist, I have very mixed feelings about that, because I felt like the office of the president is not something that Black women should aspire to. I feel like it's not in the dreams that our ancestors had for us. I think about Harriet Tubman, and I think about, did she really, go down to the South 300 times to bring people to freedom, only for us to have the opportunity as a black woman to drop bombs on babies? I mean, that is frankly what I felt. And, I expressed that sentiment. I wrote a lot about that. And, people just kept saying, well, what about Donald Trump? And to me, it wasn't the either or. It was that, is that something that we should aspire to? Is that our freedom dream to hold that office?
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I think you really hit the nail on the head in terms of the mix of emotions and the intersecting identities that you and I both hold, as it relates to being very aware of the attacks that are rooted in racism and sexism that we saw, that they can't help but impact you. Knowing that someone is being constantly lobbed with hateful rhetoric, at the same time knowing the power of the empire, and knowing that I desire a society that is more liberatory than what Democrats have provided, and still holding that desire and working towards that goal. At the same time, also recognizing that goal it just became a lot more difficult with Donald Trump in office. But we do have our final guest who is here with us on Zoom, Mr. Charles Ellison. If you could introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about some of your initial thoughts from the election.
Right, thanks for having me. I appreciate that. I appreciate meeting everyone virtually. I'm Charles Ellison. I'm actually based in Washington, D.C. right now. Grew up in Philadelphia, grew up in the Logan section of Philadelphia. I am publisher of thebeano.com, also principal of BE Strategy, veteran public affairs strategist. Many might know my voice from WURD. I formerly broadcasted on WURD radio there in Philadelphia for a number of years. But Feeling right now, the feeling is one of pensiveness, but also staying engaged. And prior to the election and the election outcome last week, was feeling cautiously optimistic because, especially in my field in public affairs and also dealing with a lot of political insiders, strategists, knowing a lot of pollsters, getting a constant stream of that data. There was data at the time before the election showing that Vice President Harris was going to pull it out, that it was, everything was tight, but that she would pull it out. In fact, 90% of the top forecasters were all saying that she would even win the Electoral College. So there was some cautious optimism there. I'm not, with this outcome that we now all have to accept, I'm not at all stunned by it or shocked. However, I'm deeply concerned about it, and definitely it's something that was within the realm of anticipation for sure. And I think it's time for absolutely us as a country to engage in some deep soul searching. That's first and foremost. So I guess that goes back to that earlier conversation, that earlier point you were making about the need for like a moral revolution. I think we're going to talk some more about that throughout the course of this conversation. That need for us as Americans to better understand the differences between right and wrong, to embrace what's right. Another thing, I think it's going to be very important for us to stay not just engaged, but to be literate.
Yes.
To have a bit more situational awareness. I think one big failure that we're seeing from this campaign is that there's this very troubling lack of civic literacy. People don't understand how elections work. They don't understand how campaigns work. They don't understand how their government works. They're disconnected from an understanding of how all of this works. And so we're gonna have to get a lot more literate. And also one last really important point here. Yes, there are some very troubling developments that are happening right now, that are about to happen at the federal level. Then people need to start getting much more familiar with, which they have been, falling back on to a large degree for a number of years. We're gonna have to start becoming much more familiar with our state and local level. Understand, know, and get involved in what's happening in your state legislatures, what's happening with your governors, what's happening in your city halls with your mayors. Those are very open and accessible entry points to getting involved in the political process, to understand how to develop the kind of policy that you want, the kind of policy that protects you and your communities, and to get the kind of outcomes that you desire, and frankly that we need in times like this. But very, pensive but engaged, but not fearful. The more engaged we are and the more we understand things, the better our journey moving forward will be.
Yes. I was just going to go to our first question.
Yes, that's good.
Okay, good. But I thank you so much for sharing that. I think that all of our panelists today gave us really a lot of fat to chew on for discussion today. I want to open it up by talking about a letter that Bernie Sanders wrote, saying that this was the predictable result of the Democrats' failure to respond to the needs of the working class. And first, it was white working class people to leave the Democratic Party, and now we were seeing people of color, including Latinx and Black people, also leaving the Democratic Party. And so, I'm wondering if folks can respond to that. Was this a failure of the Democrats to meet the needs of working class folks, and we can include in that a lot of different areas and topics for discussion. But I want to talk about that specifically in light of my own background. I don't talk about this much, but I was pretty involved in Democratic politics. in college and a little bit post-college. I did attend the Democratic National Convention in 2012. I was one of the youngest delegates to the National Convention back then, but I met a lot of Democratic consultants as a part of that experience. And so one consultant specifically told me that he didn't think it was worth it to reach out to people of color, to reach out to, low information voters, as he termed it, or people that were perhaps less likely to vote than someone in a senior center. And it made more sense for Democrats to adhere to those kinds of concerns rather than the concerns of people of color. So I've been reflecting on that, and I'm just interested to hear, did the Democrats fail the working class in this election? Did they fail to meet the moment?
Let's go to Charles first on that one.
Yeah.
I think the Democrats woefully failed in responding to perceptions, working class perceptions of the economy and how the working class is feeling. Democratic strategists, Democratic consultants, and on up to the candidates, were failing to understand that the relationship between many of these economic outcomes that we're seeing right now, and people's attitudes about those outcomes are very different and very much more complex. So, and I think that Democrats also failed to, why I say perceptions is that Democrats had an opportunity here, once again, looking at it from a strategist perspective, but Democrats really had an opportunity here, and there was a lot of missed moments. Like, remember that debate, that only debate between Donald Trump and Vice President Harris, where that first question, I think she stumbled on a bit, before she kind of regained her footing, and she did clearly win that debate, but where they were asking, is something to the effect of, was these past 4 years, what makes America better now than over the past 4 years, compared to like the 4 years prior to that. And, she had trouble answering that, or is America better off now than it was 4 years ago? Of course. I mean, in terms of all the macroeconomic indicators, black male unemployment is 5.1% right now. That's the lowest it's ever been since the Fed started tracking that data in 1972. It was 12.5% in 2020, while Donald Trump was president. So at the height of Donald Trump's presidency. So why wouldn't it be? Why wouldn't we be better off, right? So, black wealth actually a little bit better, still having some issues. So Democrats really missed an opportunity to do a both and here, be very transparent, of course, about the conditions that people are living in, sort of a lot of the economic struggles that people are going through, and kind of take people on the journey with them and say, hey, look at what we've done, just brag about it a little bit. Hey, we've invested over $4 trillion into the economy between the American Rescue Plan, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, the CHIPS and Science Act, and the Inflation Reduction Act, the Biden Climate Plan. That's $4 trillion. When you look at it, on average, the federal budget is $6 trillion every year. $24 trillion over 4 years. That's 17%. $4 trillion is 17% of that, and that stabilized the economy. Those are better economic conditions for the working class to get through it. So they could have did a both and here, where they could have said, hey, we understand y'all are going through some struggles, your credit scores are low, you're not feeling like you have enough money in the bank account, but look, we have created the necessary fundamental economic conditions for you to get through this. And they didn't, and that's where they failed to better navigate through people's perceptions of the economy and fail to understand the disconnect.
Charles, I hear you on that, but so let's deal with it this way. About 45% of the people are going to vote Republican. Another 45% are going to vote Democrat. It's about what that 10% does. And that 10%, roughly 8% of it or 7% of it decided to vote for Trump. She only won by 3 points. So, all right. So So there's some 4-year question issues that might affect the 10%. But there's some structural issues that affect these 45%, and that the majority of white people in this nation have voted for the Republican Party every year since 1964. Since the signing of the Civil Rights Act, the signing of the Voting Rights Act, every year since then, the majority of white people in this country have voted for the Republican Party. And many of them are working class. So there's some Democrat structural issues that have to be addressed that are greater than what happened in the last 4 years. And Trump exercises that. As one white person said, the way he talks like me. He talks like I do. Well, I love listening. I'm a big Eagle fan. I listen to WIP. And I recognize that Donald Trump sounds like the guys on WIP.
Right.
And so there's something there in maybe uneducated white people or white people in general that is being drawn to some of the things that he is saying that also heighten race and fears of a burgeoning majority people of color in this nation. And that when Democrats don't talk about race in those specific ways, they lose.
So I think there.
Anybody can jump in now.
Oh,
Anybody can jump in. Feel free.
I think Rosalind, if you want to jump in, I think there's a lot of places that this can those two comments can kind of go.
Yeah.
Specifically, that even if we have like the macro statistics, people don't feel that way. People feel burdened. Right. People feel people are struggling, right? And so, Rosalind, you want to?
I guess I'll just to kick off, I'll say, like, I agree. You brought up Bernie Sanders' statement, so I just endorse that 200%. He can speak for me on this for sure, and I think for our after and I say that that's not just my personal opinion, but so our union. One thing I'm proud of in this election is, after 2016, I was here in Pennsylvania. We watched Pennsylvania go red for the first time since George Bush the first, and we felt like we had done stuff for that election, but we felt like we had not done enough. We knew we were capable of more. So this time around, we ran Unite Here ran the largest independent door knocking operation in the entire state of Pennsylvania. We are not the largest union in the state of Pennsylvania, but we ran the largest door knocking operation in the whole state. So we knocked on 1.35 million doors. We talked to over 200,000 people. Mostly in low-income, working-class communities, mostly black and brown communities, also white working-class communities. So when I'm speaking, I am speaking about what we're hearing. And so for me, the question is always, why are these races so close? We should be asking that question to the 45% question. Why are these races so close? And in my opinion, based on with these conversations with all of these voters, I don't think it's just a messaging issue for the Democratic Party. I think it is structural. I think the party is part of our economic system in this country. The party is still controlled by corporate America or multinational capital, and that's who they're ultimately responsible to. And Bernie Sanders was an example of a campaign that wasn't responsible for that, but everybody else is. So have the Democrats done good things for working people? Yes, there have been real concrete things that have happened that matter for all of us, for working class people, for women, for people of color, for queer people, but it is not enough. And what we encounter on the doors, what we're doing out there in our canvas operation, what we've been doing is our main focus is not trying to convince the person who was going to vote for Trump to vote for Harris. Our main thing was to get the person, I was visiting one of our members to talk about the union, and then we talked about voting after we talked about her contract, and she didn't know if she was going to vote or not. And the main thing that we're dealing with is people that are not going to vote. They're going to stay home, and they're going to stay home because for them voting for Trump is like, it is insane. But the idea of the idea that they would vote for Harris, why? What has changed in their communities? These small things, people are angry. They are sick of it. They're either furious or they're just despairing and have kind of given up on the political system, and that is what we are dealing with. And so we're focused on how do we give people not hope through the election, because I don't really believe in that, right? But like, how do people learn that they do have power as individuals? They can stand up and fight, they can organize, and they can win things. And then voting is an easy thing after that, once you do that, once people feel some power. But that's really what we're dealing with. And these like measured changes, are not enough. It's not enough. The way, people, that what's happened with inflation post-COVID is out of control. People are working an insane number of jobs to keep up. Childcare costs are ridiculous. So many people are we have so many, mostly single mothers, trying to unrealistically try to, the costs are insane. We don't support, we're not supporting people taking care of children. We, we know it's anyway. There are a million specific issues we could talk about in terms of these issues, and I just think the Democratic Party is not responding to that anger. The Republican Party was, right, and using it in very nasty ways in terms of race, and let's not forget gender, because to me what went on here in terms of the really, I don't want to talk about misogyny or patriarchy, just male control and dominance through force, through violence, the endorsement of violence, right? Which, like, all of us as women have had to, like, deal with the threat of male violence our whole lives, right? That it's just, it is outrageous, but it's channeling that anger in that very negative direction. And so I feel like we need to be channeling that anger in the direction that it deserves, which is the corporate America, multinational capital that is controlling our elections. They don't speak for the people. The people need to speak up.
If I may jump in here, I think that it's a both and, right? What you were saying about a lack of civic education, civic literacy, obviously that played into play. I do want to say what may be, an interesting perspective or kind of off the left, but I feel like Trump is a very, very brilliant communicator and messenger. People on the left love to joke about how dumb he is, but when you actually analyze what he says, how he says it, he has these catchphrases that unfortunately hold, things like racism, and give people who are racist or who have racist tendencies, it gives them something to latch onto. So when he says those repeatedly, he's just bringing up those feelings over and over again. The Democrats don't do that well, and more so, though, to Rosalind's point, I mean, it seems like they keep trying to sway people who are, who might vote for Trump, and most of them are. Like, if you might, you're probably gonna go that way, right? Because you've bought into a system of white supremacy. You don't question that at all. But they don't ever seem to be talking to working class people. And again, back to what happened with Kamala Harris, I feel like she ran basically on policies that were Republican light. They weren't drastically radical enough to fix what's happening in real people's material lives.
They were good policies, but they did not talk about the broad picture to give the real structural changes that we're talking about. If since 1973, in real wages, taking into account inflation, people lost at least 12%. That means people had more money really in 1973 than they have now. Now they don't have, but also now they don't have a pension. They don't have security, they don't have health care. They don't have all these other things that the union movements help create, because so many of the jobs are not unionized. And so they're suffering, but they don't have a problem with not having a job. They have a problem with having too many jobs. They got 3 or 4 jobs for the one job they used to be able to take care of the entire family. All of these structural pieces, Kamala didn't talk about, but Trump did. He said the immigrants are at fault. They had a reason why.
Well, I want to broaden this to kind of our next question, which I mean, you mentioned Republican light talking points from the Democratic Party, and I think certainly, Reverend Holston, your point that some of Vice President Harris's policies were good, but there were others that were, particularly statements she made about America being the most lethal and deadly militarized force that has ever been seen before, particularly as a way to if you're trying to court young people who, some of whom went to college and protested about the genocide in Gaza, who were brutalized on their own campuses by their own administration. You have an entire generation of young people who came of age with the first election of Donald Trump, weren't able to go to their high school graduations or their college graduations because of COVID, are in college or in some, graduate level program, and then are being brutalized for speaking out about injustices in the world under a Democratic administration, and then being asked to vote and support that same Democratic administration that sanctioned the reprisal that they experienced. And so I think there's also, in addition to a disconnect with the working class and what Democrats believe about policy versus the lived experience on the ground, I also think there was a disconnect with the policies that were that many young people care about, that were just not addressed by the Democratic Party in this election cycle.
So we're kind of the question around Gaza and the continued genocide, and it is a genocide that's happening. In fact, it will be enhanced because of Trump being elected. The day of the election, he got rid of his defense minister in Israel, who was the guy who was the pushing for the ceasefire that was a part of his administration. He got rid of him.
Yes.
And now they're talking even greater detail about what they're going to do to expand areas that were really supposed to be under Palestinian control. Just so we throw the question out, how much did that affect the youth vote, young people vote, but vote for everybody? How much did the issues of that continual genocide, as I stood protesting that issue with people of all races, including many Jewish people who said, don't do this in my name. How great of an effect was that on this election? And I throw that out to any of the guests here.
I think what happened, particularly with young people, a lot of young people actually became radicalized over the last year. So in the post-election aftermath, many of them were blamed and accused of being single issue voters, single issue being Gaza, and look what you did now. And I just think a lot of people failed. I think a lot of people were radicalized. They started to see the American empire for what it is, what it does. They became educated through TikTok, through some of the brilliant content creators online about the history of it, right? That this is not, this didn't happen on October 7th. It started in 1948. But what happened, there was a vacuum there. As people became radicalized, what they really needed was a more well-rounded political education with an abolitionist practice for my money. But in the dearth of that, they felt like there was an either I vote for genocide, or or I don't vote at all, or I vote third party. What was missing from that context is these longtime organizers, longtime freedom fighters, some of which who advise using voting as a tool. So there was an amazing video that came out by Indian Collective. It was called Vote Like a Radical. And it talked about you vote to choose your opponent, right? This isn't a vote for Kamala Harris or the Democratic Party per se, but vote for her because she's the opponent that you most want to fight. And I think that a lot of people did not get that education that really needed it, but everything happened so fast. Like, a lot of people were radicalized, and there was a lot of, there still is, a lot of, angst online about who did what, what intellectuals pushed the third party to our detriment. But that context wasn't there because they only knew Gaza. That's how they got radicalized.
Charles, you want to jump in, Charles?
I think Charles might be frozen, but hopefully he's able to rejoin us soon.
Okay, Rosalind, you want to jump in?
Yes. I think that this really connects to the question from earlier about the Democratic Party, right? So not so much in terms of this youth movement and the overall movement which has been expanding in support of Palestine, but this was a very good example of a missed opportunity for the Democratic Party, right? We're talking about who's controlling the Democratic Party. It's not just, I don't actually think that this is, like for example, with our members who aren't represented, our hotel workers and food service workers in the city of Philadelphia are not super involved in the movement for Palestinian rights, support it, but not super involved with that, right? It was not a hard conversation with our membership. We passed a resolution, calling for a ceasefire, calling for an end to the occupation, calling for all that money that we're spending to be invested in our city right here, right? Because imagine if we were not, and people like Sanders and that part of the Democratic Party that have been saying this for decades. It's not a new message, but it's the right message, which is that all that money that we're spending on killing people overseas, which is a lot. Israel has been the biggest source of foreign aid, that's where we've put the most foreign aid for my entire life. But in general, that's money that could be going into our communities. That could be going into education here. That could be going into after-school programs. That could be going into free childcare. That could be going into all the programs that we actually need here that would radically change people's lives. And instead, it's going into killing children in Gaza. And so that's not if the Democratic Party would actually speak to people, that is actually a majority message. That's not some minority message, right, of some student radicals, even though, I applaud their leadership, but it is not. They are speaking for the majority of the people in this country that support this, and who the Democratic Party is answering to when they're refusing to take a strong stand against genocide in Gaza is the donor class, right? That's who they're supporting. And as a Jewish person, I have to say that I know that those people, for the most part, don't have our interests. They are not. They don't have the protection of the Jewish people in their hearts at all. I've met lots of them. I would consider them incredibly anti-Semitic. And I don't feel safe there. And so, the safety for Jewish people has to be in building multiracial unity. There's no question for me about that. But I think that that is just another example of where, you're not going to take a strong stand on these economic issues. You're not going to take a strong stand on Gaza. You're afraid, but you're afraid because you're answering to donors who ultimately, we have to remember, who picked Kamala Harris as our nominee? The donor class and the New York Times, right? That's not the people. I mean, I found that infuriating. Where is our vote there? There is no vote,
So, I think the difficult thing is, what do we do from this point on? And I'm taking probably a strange lesson from what Republicans did. What Obama came into power, and both the House and the Senate were Democrat. The Republicans did not try to act like Democrats. What they did was start the Tea Party and move further right. And 2 years later, they had the House back. So, and they said they were going to fight everything that he did, and they did fight everything and used every tactic to fight everything he did. I'm hearing that the Democrats want to now be more like Republicans. Instead of moving to the left and saying, this is who we are. That 45% that would vote Republican anyway, that 45% would vote Democrat if Democrat moved left. Still, it would vote. And if it voted, and actually were doing more what Bernie says with a little more of a race vision, which Bernie Sanders doesn't seem to have that, so he's not the one, but somebody who understands how race fits in this a little bit.
Both.
I'm seeing that as a solution. Stand up against what you get ready to deal with and shift over to policies that are really going to make a difference in people's lives, and do it with race class consciousness as being a real way to move us forward, not just for the next 4 years, but for a generation.
Absolutely. And that is really the next question that we had, which is what can...
Oh, I'm sorry, I jumped the gun.
No, that was perfect. The question was, what can Democrats learn from Republicans? And I think your piece about the Tea Party, it's like when you have these major losses, I remember the day after the election in 2008, and pollsters were talking about, or political pundits on TV were talking about if this was the end of the Republican Party. Right, and you know how quickly we now know that to not be the case.
We were in a post-racial society.
Yeah, but I mean, Reverend Holston said it plainly. They organized, and they organized their own movement separate from their donor class.
And they kicked out some people who they thought didn't represent that more right point of view. They intentionally tried to purge people who was not going to have that particular point of view. But 2 years later they were back in power because they had more clarity about what they believed, even though it was crazy. And they convinced their other people in that sense of clarity. And then Donald Trump came in and went even further right. So there are some solutions for us that are real, and that I think, you know, I don't want to, I keep kicking, kind of embracing Bernie and kicking him at the same time. But his ideas about where we are, he's been consistent over the last 30 years, talking about the level of inequality, how 3 people control as much wealth in our nation as the bottom 50% of the world, and that these numbers are outrageous. These billionaires are just increasing their wealth over and over, and until that stops, we're going to continue to be in these kinds of situations. We want to get Charles back in here. We haven't gotten him back in here yet, but anybody here want to just jump in on that point? How should we move going forward?
I mean, first of all, I think you should tell some consultant that, because that's actually a brilliant idea. But it would take for the Democrats to have that coalition where they moved to the left. It would take their willingness to divest from the billionaire donor class. So that, you know, we'll have to see how serious they are about addressing people's material needs, and that's what it boils down to. I find it troubling how much money is in politics. I find it troubling that both Jamal Bowman in New York and Cori Bush's race in Missouri were essentially bought by AIPAC. So I think that's the kind of political education and awareness I think everyday people don't even realize, how deeply implicated these systems are, entrenched these systems are, and may point to why the Democrats are only going to go so far. I mean, well, they've actually gone left, or excuse me, they've also keep inching further right, as Rosalind was saying. So
yeah, and I mean, I'll just state this, pretty plainly. We keep talking about the billionaire donor class, The wealth transfer that we have seen in the last 5 years, it is unparalleled in American society. We have to sound the alarm about the fact that people are getting richer and richer and richer. We talk about wages staying the same. The wages are only staying the same for the poor and working class. For the billionaire, for the top 1%, for the 0.1% of people, it just keeps getting exponentially greater and greater and greater. I mean, I always bring this up as an example. This is a touch point for me. I remember when I was a teenager, and I remember watching on TV them talking about Bill Gates and how he was the richest man in the world with $46 billion. Elon Musk, I won't tell you how long ago that was, but it was. I'm a millennial, so it was recent. But Elon Musk is worth $300 billion and counting, right? And so we have to be able to talk about how moneyed interests are taking hold and are taking over taking over the society.
And Charles, good to have you back on the program, Charles. Again, we're back talking really about what are our next steps. What do we do coming out of this? What do we do coming out of this election? I'm gonna turn to Charles to kind of share on that point.
I think that, further, we went into this, or made this point earlier about anger. So first, Democrats are going to have to figure out a smart way, a much more stylish way of tapping into voter anger without it turning into resentment or into something that's hostile against our neighbors or other people, but productive anger. Because that was one of the big lessons that came out of this election. Probably the greatest lesson is that voters want to see some anger in their candidates and their campaigns. So that's one. I think that Democrats need to tap into some of that, and look at moving forward. Looking for ways to activate and energize voters in that frame, and that's what Republicans were doing it, but doing that in a way that's stylistically that's a bit more responsible, that's not demagoguing or marginalizing other groups as they're going about it, and just being continue to be honest and transparent with people about issues, and also being taking very complex, complicated issues and translating them into the type of language that people can understand. Whether those people are in places like North Philadelphia, where I grew up, or suburban Philadelphia, or wherever. So there's these very complex economic and geopolitical and other policy issues that people need to understand, that they just need simple breakdowns on. And so I think the Harris campaign had a real problem there, had a real challenge of breaking down or kind of coming up with digestible language for those issues. Because it's just like you said earlier, Reverend, she had a good platform. I mean, who doesn't want like a $25,000 down payment for their house? Just say that. Stop framing it as it was like so complex. It was like, we're going to do a $25,000 tax credit. Don't use language like tax credits or anything like that. Just say, hey, I'm going to give you $25,000 for your house. I'm going to give you another $6,000 for every new child you have. And I'm going to give your new business. I'm going to give it X amount of dollars more loans. On top of that, we're going to take some of this $4 trillion worth of money that still unspent from what we passed, what we did during the Biden administration, and I want to spend more of it on y'all. I mean, literally simple language like that. And that kind of language, that kind of digestible language was not deployed to full effect during this campaign. On the geopolitical front, on issues, on topics like what's happening in the Middle East, it's like, who was going to do it better? Like as far as like negotiating some kind of peace agreement, look at what's happening right now. We're seeing former Arkansas Governor Mike Huckabee is the one who's being appointed ambassador to Israel, and so we know he's actually said on record there's no such thing as Palestinians. So here we have the uncommitted movement who put in all this energy to make Trump and Kamala seem like the same, put in all this energy to press this false equivalency, and now we're in a situation where the West Bank is about to be turned into waterfront property. I mean, that's really the aim here, and so it's like having like deep, honest conversations, practical conversations with folks on the left about, hey, this is how geopolitics really works. We're the ones who can do it better. We know how to do this, how to navigate this. No, we're not dropping bombs on civilians and others, but we're just trying to figure out the best way to kind of move forward in a very complex region where these conflicts have been going on for about 75 plus years. And Republicans are going to make this situation worse. They don't know how to do that. So it's literally going to be also like, real quick, lastly, we're going to have, as a Black community, we're going to have to like reevaluate, revive, and rebuild our core institutions. Black church, HBCUs, community organizations, our public schools, and really leaning on, once again, our state and local policymakers to help us do that, and being very urgent as we're going about that, and being very resilient, but putting a sense of urgency into that, and really making sure that, you know, we've got thousands of Black elected officials on the state and local level, and it's time to like really press on them to be serious. I mean, the days of representation politics, just for representation alone, for representation's sake, are just over.
Well, certainly that.
Like this is the moment of urgency.
Yeah, we have about 5 minutes left in the program, and want to give everybody an opportunity to share.
Yeah, I mean, I think just briefly, I want to go to Kanis really quickly on that. You know, certainly that that last point about representational politics not being enough is certainly valid, but I think many on the left are very aware of what both the Democrats and Republicans have been doing in Gaza, and are very specifically attuned to the U.S.'s funding for Israel, and funding of bombs, funding of war. I think a lot of folks are specifically attuned to that, and unless the Democratic Party is specifically willing to contend a moral revolution of its own, then, you know, they will never win those voters back. That it cannot. There are certain things that, you know, for certain people, those are that's their bottom line, and it's not going to be able to be reasoned with. But Kanis, I want to go to that.
I want to say, I mean, you can't put lipstick on a pig. I mean, genocide is genocide, and I think if, you know, historically, there's a brilliant book called Except for Palestine by Mark Lamont Hill that literally tracks how the Democrats have been equally, if not more, complicit in what's gone on in Palestine. So again, I think that moral reckoning, that moral revolution, are at the end of the day, are the Democrats willing to say no? And I think that's slightly separate from this election. I think certain people understood that she had to get in office first.
That didn't happen.
And that didn't happen. But in terms of where she was kind of hedging bets, I think that was the strategy. But whether or not she was going to move on Palestine, push back, really demand a ceasefire, arms embargo, really depends on what we were talking about earlier, that willingness to divest from the billionaire class who are all up in our politics. You know, AIPAC is running a lot of our politics, and we have to be honest about that.
Yeah,
Rosalind,
absolutely.
I'm going to give you, about 30 seconds or so. You got about a minute left.
Yeah. I guess in terms of looking forward,
Yes.
what I would say is, like, if we actually want the Democratic Party to divest from the billionaire class, which I do, I think we do, to actually really speak to people, they won't. I don't trust they're going to do that on their own, or even the good people within the party are going to do that. We want to lift them up, but ultimately, I am an organizer. I do think organizing is the answer. These people that are angry, they can't just vote. Voting is not enough. We need people to lead fights, right? Like I literally fight billionaires every day. That's and we need more people out there fighting billionaires, pushing, winning. That's what we have to build more working class, multiracial working class power across gender and sexual divides. That is ultimately what's going to push the party, in my opinion.
Absolutely.
Yes. So we're so thankful for this program to talk about next steps after the election. And I know many of you are again dealing with all kinds of emotions and the feelings regarding the election and moving forward. But know that there have always been these kinds of difficult times in this country. And we have used those times to organize ourselves. Some of our greatest movements have come in the most difficult times. Yes. And the most transformation in the nation have happened when people who normally weren't working together because of the circumstances that they were facing began to work together. We in North Philadelphia need to understand the pain in Johnstown and Aliquippa and Altoona and all the places across Pennsylvania and America, inner city, rural areas that are experiencing the same pain because of the billionaire class. And when we all come together, That's when we can make the change we desire. Thank you so much again.
Remain hopeful, remain in the
yes.
fight.
We look forward to seeing you next time here on Just Nation.
Thank you, everyone. All right.